Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. Wise words from Edmund Burke. Unfortunately, Americans are ignoring history. They're ignoring the failures of past power nations and empires. We're ignoring our own past and what made America great. We need a wake-up call. And that wake-up call comes from none other than our friend, Dr. Everett Piper. Not only is he a weekly columnist with the Washington Times, but he's also debuting a powerful new book designed to knock some sense back into America. He's an academic by vocation and training. Dr. Piper is also a great friend and a frequent guest in the Economic War Room. Welcome back, Dr. Piper.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to be here.
All right, let's start with history. I know Oklahoma Wesleyan, where you were president for a couple of decades, they taught history. What does America today look like based on history? You can give a biblical example or any other historical example.
Do the words Sodom and Gomorrah sound familiar to you? Seriously, I think it was John MacArthur. I'm going to credit him with this. He once said that if God doesn't judge America, then he owes Sodom and Gomorrah an apology. And don't you have to recognize the reality of that right now? We are selfish, we are sensual, we're worshiping license rather than God's law. I've said this before on your show. G.K. Chesterton told us that if you get rid of the big laws of God, you don't get liberty. You're going to get thousands and thousands of little laws that rush in to fill the vacuum. And as a nation, we've refused to live by 10 simple laws. Initially, God only gave us 10 simple laws. And if we would have agreed to live by those laws, we didn't need any others. And frankly, Jesus summarized those 10 by stating that they could be obeyed in 2. So we refuse to live by 10 or 2. So what do we get today? Reams upon reams upon reams upon reams of little laws that rush in to fill the vacuum, down to the point where they're telling us what pronouns we can use and can't use and how to use the bathroom. This is not a nation of freedom. This is a nation of license that has now been subjected to contrived laws made up by man rather than those simple ones that are given to us by God. Now, why are we there? Because we've ignored the lessons of history. What is the historical lesson of the Old Testament? It's the same cycle I just described. Over and over again, the Israelites refused to live by God's directives, by God's simple laws, and then they suffer the consequences therein. And what is the first consequence they always suffer? The loss of freedom. We ought to learn this lesson. And you, Russell, accredited, did you say Russell Kirk?
Edmund Burke.
Those who don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. George Santayana is also cited as repeating that phrase over and over again. The best predictor of future behavior is always past behavior. That's another way of saying the same thing, that the past behavior of the nations that have preceded us, the past behavior of even our own culture, the behavior that led to the need for the Great Awakenings, that behavior is going to bear consequences. And if we don't recognize the correction that has been proven over and over again by history to be the only salt, the only light, the only salve, the only soap that will cleanse culture, then we are going to be doomed to some correction that's going to be painful. That's the lesson of the Old Testament and the story of the Israelites, and it's also the lesson of the Roman Empire. It's also the lesson of the gaining of freedom and then the loss of it with every human civilization that we ever study. So we need to understand the historical lessons in order to avoid the same mistakes.
You know, and to your point of history, you're right. It wasn't Edmund Burke. He's often quoted as having said that, but he wasn't. It's George Santayana, just as you said. So I give you credit being the better historian here. So good job.
Well, it's both. I'm sure it's both.
Yeah, but you know, I've got some of the articles that you've written that make the point. Dear Don Lemon, you're not God. Mr. President, why bother sending our kids back to school? California now wants to teach counter-genocide to over 6 million students in its public schools. Signs of Orwellian times, the Equality Act and the abolition of women. I mean, these are things that you're writing about weekly in Washington Times. Tell us what makes Don Lemon not God, and what did he say that makes you think that he thought he was?
Well, he goes on The View the week before Easter, if I remember the time frame correctly, and he tells everybody, the world watching, that Christianity, the church, needs to re-examine its 2,000-year tradition and teachings on sexual fidelity, sexual dignity, and sexual morality. Well, I'm not sure where Don Lemon got his theology degree and where he got all of his ecclesiastical wisdom, but I'm going to go with the wisdom of the ages. I'm going to go with the lessons of history. I'm going to go with the Apostle Peter, Paul, James, and Jude. I'm going to go with Jesus himself, who said in the book of Revelation, outside are the dogs, those who practice what? Sexual immorality and deception. And Mr. Lemon, it sure seems like your words are deceptive, i.e. deception. And it sure seems like you think you should be able to engage in sexual license rather than sexual fidelity and the 2,000-year standard of sexual morality. Mr. Lemon, you're not God. I'm going to go with Jesus on this one.
No, that's a great point. And unfortunately, as those words were written, there was a Roman Empire that dominated the planet. And that Roman Empire, it didn't last. It fell from foolishness and depravity. And unfortunately, I think that's one more of our lessons of history that we're facing here in America.
Well, again, this is a repeat, but there was an old president, a retired president from a college, I think it was Earlham. He was once asked, what's the secret to a successful leadership, a successful college presidency? He said 3 things: repetition, repetition, repetition. So I'm going to repeat. We know that the Roman Empire fell because of internal depravity. We know that when you lose your moorings, when there's no measuring rod outside of those things being measured, when your culture no longer has a truth as the judge, as the referee, to blow the whistle on the game, that you're going to implode and that you will become subject to the rule of the gang. David Horowitz tells us of that in his intellectual autobiography, Left Illusions. Horowitz was part of the Black Panthers in the 60s. He was kind of their intellectual machine behind the scenes, helping them write things, helping them craft their message. Now, what led Horowitz from being a Black Panther as a young guy to a conservative talking head, an icon today? It was because he woke up one day and realized that his ideas were leading to violence, to vengeance, and actual murder of one of his best friends. And he, at that time, acknowledged, confessed, if you will, repented, if you will, not necessarily in the Christian sense, but intellectually, he repented of the sin of allowing culture and celebrating the fact that culture would be ruled by the gang. In other words, the gang made him terrified, and he was part of that gang, and he recognized that if they're going to kill my best friend, they'll kill me. And this is what has led to the intellectual conversion of some other liberals of our time, such as Dave Rubin and others. This is what led Thomas Sowell to recognize that he was wrong in his Marxist days, and now he embraces freedom and capitalism. It's this acknowledgement that history tells us that the rule of the gang will crush all dissent, but that won't end there, because then that chaos of the gang needs to be controlled by something, and it's going to be controlled by the rule of one, the tyrant.
So we've been talking about history with Dr. Everett Piper, and that instructs us about the past. Now let's look to the future, and we'll look to the future with literature, particularly science fiction. There are 3 books out that I want to talk to him about: Brave New World, Aldous Huxley; 1984 by George Orwell; and Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut. So, Dr. Piper, tell me, what future do you see us facing? Is it any of those 3 dystopian futures, or do you have something else?
I think it's an amalgamation of the 3. I mean, Huxley talks about Big Brother controlling our every move and constantly watching over us. Obviously, we can see some of that right now in terms of big government and the control and the power that government wants to have over our daily lives. Huxley talks about the problem not necessarily being Big Brother, but we allow ourselves to be controlled. In other words, it's big culture. And you see that right now in the way we're reacting to, for example, the way the corporate world is seeking to control our every move. Well, we're allowing that in a sense by our engagement and our buying of products and our acquiescence to corporate power. It's not necessarily government and Big Brother, but it's big culture. And then, of course, the third one is the control of the mind to the extent that all is equal, the control of the body to the extent that everybody must be equal. And then if one person has any natural innate advantage over another, then somehow, whether it be government or the corporate world, Big Brother or big culture, somebody's going to come in and dumb down everything to the level of some sort of egalitarian society that has no distinction. And don't you see that right now in this cry for safe spaces and this cry for being comfortable all the time? You can't beat me because that makes me feel sad. So it's an amalgamation of all 3.
Well, on that third one, let's go there for a second, because you've written extensively and spoken extensively about how we've redefined women. So we've essentially defined them out of existence. I think of Harrison Bergeron. I mean, one of the things is if you were a superior athlete, they would remove your athletic ability so that you would be, everybody be the same. If you were a smart intellect, they'd put something on your, a cap you'd have to wear so that your brain didn't function as well. But this whole idea that we're going to make, even in athletics, men and women have to be the same, so men can compete in women's athletics, and we're having all, I mean, it's just nuts, isn't it?
Oh, it's crazy. It's the warning of the prophet Isaiah. Woe unto them who call evil good and good evil, bitter sweet and sweet bitter. Let me paraphrase. Woe unto those who call men women and women men. Woe unto those who make all things equal. Woe unto those who reverse the definitions of life. And that is exactly where we are right now, where we're claiming that men have no advantage over women in competition. Well, that ignores the facts. That just ignores the reality of Olympic athletics. Rather, if that's true, then why in the world doesn't the WNBA draft LeBron James to play on one of the women's teams? Why? Why not? But they don't want to acknowledge the fact that LeBron James has superior skills, innately, physically, genetically. LeBron James is better than the best woman. And as we know, I think you and I have talked about it, there are multiple high school sprinters, male high school sprinters, who have better times than the fastest woman in the world in the Olympics. So there's obviously a difference. You can't have this radical egalitarianism. It's a lie. God told us that in the beginning he created male and female in his image. Male and female, two distinctions that complement one another. There is complementarianism there. There isn't egalitarian radical equality. That denies what God intended to do.
No, there's no question about that. And the other headline that we see, and one I can't stand, I turn on the morning CNBC to watch the investment, and it takes 10 minutes before there's somebody with a cannabis stock. And that reminds me of Brave New World. I remember reading it in high school, that Soma, that you're going to take this drug, and it's complete sexual freedom, which is really sexual bondage. You're really bound to this idea. But that's the Brave New World that Huxley was describing, right?
Exactly. So we've got Bergerons. We just talked about the parallels there in terms of this fake egalitarianism, dumbing down exceptionality. Nothing is exceptional anymore. Everything is going to be average. Has to be average, everything. And then you've got Huxley, which talks about soma and philes. Well, what were the feelies? Feelies was this device where you, after you worked your day, you came home from the factory, you went into your apartment, your cubicle by yourself, you didn't have any social interaction, and you looked at your little screen and you watched porn. Doesn't that sound exactly like what we're doing with our smartphones today? Our feelies, while we're smoking our weed. So we've become a culture of drugs. We've become a culture that wants to numb the mind and numb the soul, numb the intellect, so that we can just look at our iPhones, look at our smartphones, and engage in some sort of distraction, even the debauched distraction of porn. That's Huxley.
Yeah, and that's what's being sold to us as liberty. I mean, what bothers me is that those are the liberties you have. You can sleep with whoever you want to or have any sexual encounter you want, and you can take any drug that you want to. But I want to start a business. I want to start a lemonade stand as a kid, or I want to start a business as an adult. No, you can't do that. That might not be safe. So we've been sold this lie of what liberty is. And we've been given complete control. Like 1984, they watch everything. They monitor you on social media. If you say the wrong thing, you get canceled or cut off. It is like the social credit scores of China implemented right here, but not by government, by the quote unquote free market.
Yeah. And we've lost the understanding of the distinction between license and liberty. What we have today is license, sexual license. You can do anything you want. That's sexual license. That's not liberty. That's not freedom. Because as we're told in Scripture, when you give yourself over to sin, sin controls you and you lose your freedom to that sin. It now governs every aspect of your life. So sexual license actually ends up taking us to a new master. And it's this master of debauchery, this master of porn, this master of sin over our lives. The liberty that we find in Jesus Christ is the thing that sets us free to live in the grand and glorious boundaries, those few simple boundaries that God gave us. We can enjoy the playground then because we recognize that the fences around that playground are there for our own good. That's liberty, whereas the license that we argue for today actually is bondage.
Yeah, there's no question. And what we're seeing, as you point out, it's a literature lesson in science fiction. We're watching all three of them come true before our very eyes. So we're going to have to take another break. We've talked history, we've spoken about literature. When we come back, we're going to talk about civics and what we ought to be doing about this as a nation. Okay, Dr. Piper, we're providing a well-rounded education. We've talked history, we've talked literature. Now let's talk civics. And let's see if we can apply some of the lessons from the first two segments. Which generation should we be emulating, and how do we do it?
Well, I would argue we should emulate the generation of the first century church, because that church, the church of Peter and Paul, the church of John and Jude, the church that was the first generation, the church that actually witnessed the death, resurrection of Jesus Christ and his ascension into heaven, they were facing a lot of the same cultural crap that we're dealing with right now. Roman culture, Roman society wasn't all that different to our culture right now. The same debauchery, the same license, the same giving over of themselves to being controlled by government and being controlled by sin. So let's emulate what we see in the New Testament. Let's take the words of the Apostle Paul seriously. Again, I'll go back to Ephesians. Paul was challenging the church of Ephesus to speak the truth. not focus on feelings, not elevate opinions, but to speak the truth in love, recognizing that love is not license, love is not synonymous with sex. Love is actually a verb that calls upon us to care enough for our brothers and sisters to confront them and to help them grow up. Speak the truth in love and grow up. That's the generation that we should emulate. Now, if you want to get into the culture of the United States, I would suggest that the first generation of the United States is somebody we need to go learn a little bit more about, because we apparently have forgotten the words of John Adams, for example, that said our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. We might want to go back and attend to that generation too.
Yeah, and maybe the greatest generation, the one that fought evil, recognized evil, had no problem calling out Hitler as evil, and dedicating their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor just like the founders. So yeah, there are a lot of good lessons from history. I love the one about the early church in particular, because I feel increasingly isolated by a all-overpowering, all-encompassing, seemingly powerful culture that's coming down and forcing this on us. But they weren't afraid. They stood up despite all of that. So what are some action steps that we could be taking right now to right our course? What can we learn from that? Besides, we know we have to learn speaking the truth in love. What are some other things?
Courage. Have the courage to confront things that are lies. For example, I listened to a sermon that somebody sent me. I don't even know the name of the pastor. It's probably good that I don't, because I'd be tempted to out him on your show. But this pastor literally started equating the United States of America and nationalism with Nazi Germany. He said repeatedly in his sermon that Hitler learned his stuff from America, and that our nationalism, our elevation of our nation as being exceptional and superior to others, I'm using his words, is where Hitler got his ideas. Now, Kevin, you know that is balderdash, that is garbage, that is nonsense. Hitler didn't get his ideas of genocide and Holocaust and extermination of Jews and the suppression of religious freedom and outright evil from the United States. In fact, it's the United States and our commitment to a biblical worldview that led the greatest generation to recognize the evil of Hitler and to squash it with our goodness. I'm not claiming we were perfect, but I don't apologize for being a nationalist per se, in terms of believing in national borders, believing in national security, believing in a national pledge, believing in a national flag, and believing that we should preserve the dignity of our nation, and then proclaiming America to be exceptional. That doesn't make me a Nazi.
No. In fact, I've read the Bible, and at the end of it, God judges nations. There's a push to have a one world government, but at the end of it, there is God judging them nation by nation. God created nations. God believes in nations. And I think you make a valid point there. So we've got all of these issues. One of the things we talk about in the economic war room is weaponizing your money, because are you going to invest in things you believe in? Are you going to spend your money in things you believe in, give to things you believe in? Jesus said, if you can't be faithful with unrighteous mammon, who will ever trust you with the true riches? So are there any lessons we can take from that quote that we can apply today in our investment portfolios?
Oh, investment. Again, I think I really look to you for strong advice on, because you focus on the truth and you don't allow the lies of the economy, the lies of government, the lies of the manipulation of currency. You don't allow those things to dissuade you. So I think we need to focus on reality, on substance, on facts as we invest our money and as we invest our lives. The truth shall set you free. Financially, it shall set you free spiritually and physically.
Well, one example there, I'll just jump in. One example is NASDAQ's recently put a proposal that says that a board of directors has to be made up with at least one woman and at least one minority, preferably a gender minority, LGBTQ. So how does that fit in?
I think it's garbage. Again, it's bourgeois. It's fake egalitarianism. It's dumbing down You might want to go after the people that actually know what they're doing to serve on your board, rather than going after these false categories. And actually, I think Martin Luther King Jr. agreed with that when he said, "Judge people by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin." This political identity politics, this sexual fluidity, this fluidity of identity, this claiming that I'm going to be defined by my libido rather than my Lord, is the greatest lie of our culture and of our time. If I could avoid investing in any company that has imbibed that Kool-Aid and has bought into that lie, I'd put my money someplace else. I don't know if you agree with me or not on that.
Well, I'll tell you, one thing, and we do owe a great debt to you. When you were the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan, you helped us launch the NSIC Institute, National Security Investment Consultant Institute. We owe a great debt of gratitude for you, seeing the vision and giving us that initial push to get it started. So thank you for that. And I agree with you. If a company is not willing to serve all their shareholders and not willing to put the best talent in the boardroom and in the employee ranks, then they're not worth investing in. We need companies that are about the business of their business, and hopefully not destroying our values as their primary motivation. So thank you, Dr. Piper.
I don't think I'd be investing in the Major League Baseball right now. Thank you for having me on.
All right, so we're going to provide notes and a link to your website and your new book, Grow Up, which is an incredible graduation gift to give in our economic battle plan. And you can get your free economic battle plan at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies see as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.